there's nobody in the world that's packaged as many formats as Mark Itkin. I mean, the list is endless, from Big Brother, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, Kitchen Nightmares, Fear Factor. The list goes on and on and on. Each year we give an award, the C21 FRAPA Formats Gold Award, which is presented in association with MIPFormats to somebody who has made a remarkable contribution to the business. So it's a pleasure, Mark, to have you here. I'd like you to join me in welcoming Mark to the stage. So
thank you. Thank you.
We've got a very short period of time to talk about the career and the projects that Mark's been involved with before we give him his award, and then we all go and have a very nice drink down the Martinez. Don't forget that part of the proceedings. Mark, I'd just like to start by saying, from that tapestry of formats, from that career, if you were to pick 3 moments that stood out, what would those moments be?
Wow, there's a lot of moments. Okay, selling of Big Brother. I don't know if Gary Carter's here, but Gary Carter and I were selling the format in the US. Every network was interested in the show. We were at NatP, and all of the networks wanted to meet, but CBS, Les Moonves, made a special trip to New Orleans with Nancy Tellem, went into a room with us and cut the deal for Big Brother for CBS, and 15 years later, we're still on the air.
When that, just to drill down on that a little bit more, Big Brother was probably, if not certainly one of the defining shows in formats. When you came across that show, what elements within it did you think were going to make it work? Or didn't you know it might work or might not work at the time?
Well, John de Mol invited me to come here to the Netherlands to see the taping of the first, or the ongoing production of the first Big Brother. And when they walked me through the house and the hidden cameras and the social experiment element of it, it was such a fresh idea that I knew immediately it was totally new. And I'm all about trying to push the envelope and find what's the next big thing. And that I felt very strong and couldn't wait to get back to the States to sell it.
That's number 1. Number 2?
Number 2 is probably Deal or No Deal. So there was a man, I was through a friend of mine who worked at NBC. He introduced me to a man in Canada who had an insurance company who was willing to put up the largest cash prize on a game show, $5 million. And this man had created 25 suitcases, but he had no game, he had nothing. So I took that idea, I called John de Mol, I sent it to John de Mol, he gave it to Dick DeReek. Dick DeReek created the game. We all met in New York about 6 months later to see the game. Interestingly enough, the first version of that show was a Q&A game, and the show, as you know, as Deal or No Deal, was the bonus round of that show. And everybody felt that bonus round was so strong that could be the show in itself.
This is the suitcase.
The suitcase, the 25 suitcases. And so that became the show. John and I sold it in the room to Lloyd Braun at ABC. They shot 5 episodes. Lloyd Braun got fired. The new person didn't like game shows and put it on the shelf for a year. And when the option expired, an Endemol executive and an NBC executive were having lunch one day, and the NBC executive said to the Endemol executive, "Do you have anything that's ready to go?" Something, and he mentioned Deal or No Deal, and it went on the air, and the rest is history.
Wow. It's the anatomy of these things. People just don't seem to realize how long these things take. We were hearing earlier that even these big franchises take an awful long time to gestate, don't they? Third moment?
Well, in line with long gestations, American Gladiators. So I was a very, very young agent, probably had only been an agent for 3 years. And I had a client who owned a Gold's Gym in Youngstown, Ohio. And he brought me this, like an advertisement that stood on its own of 2 guys arm wrestling. And on the bottom of it said American Gladiators. And that's all it was. And I gave it to a client of mine, and he created the show, American Gladiators. It then took me 6 years to get it sold. I saw it so clearly what it could be, but I couldn't get any buyers to see what it was. And then finally, the very last syndicator, and not at the time one of the stronger syndicators, the Samuel Goldwyn Company, bought the show. It goes on the air. At the same time, a show called Rock and Roller Games, which was kind of like a high-tech roller derby show. And everyone predicted the roller derby show was going to be a giant hit. And American Gladiators, nobody really paid attention to it. 13 weeks later, roller derby canceled. Gladiators lasted 8 years and was a big format all over the world.
I mean, you couldn't hope for sort of bigger brands than those
Yeah.
shows in the end. But I'm also interested in how you got into it in the first place, because I imagine that these hits just didn't come straight away. You had to do some gestation period. So how did you get into this business?
Well, I was a lawyer in the music business, but not a very happy lawyer. I was happy being a lawyer, but loved the music business. Quit and decided I wanted to do something my other love, which was television. And I happened to have an interest in daytime and first-run syndication, which really nobody else cared about. So when I went to the agency and I trained under somebody who was doing first-run syndication and cable packaging, which is very early days in the 80s. And he got promoted to go handle primetime network, left me there by myself. And so I built basically a daytime department, which was game shows, talk shows, sports, magazine shows, and that was sort of kind of the open the door to building a non-scripted business that ultimately happened with the Real World and then the late 90s when the non-scripted format business exploded.
So if you're giving people, sorry, I've got a bit of stubble interference. If you were giving advice to people, do you have golden rules? Are there do's and don'ts when getting a show away? And for someone looking to crack the US market, what advice would you give to them?
Well, I think everybody right now is looking for the next big non-scripted hit because they come few and far between versus the golden age in the late 90s, early 2000s. I think it's really, really important to continue to evolve the genre, to kind of look at the world, see what's going on in the world and what's not being reflected on TV based on that. Plus, I think it's a really good idea. The non-scripted business, format business is mature enough now that there's probably some really good formats that could be contemporized and brought back. So I think the most important thing to think about is not to be derivative. There's enough, right now there's enough of every genre out there that's, singing competitions, dancing competitions. I think it's time to push the envelope and figure out, okay, what's the next thing that hasn't been done or hasn't been done in a new way?
There was a moment when scripted was in charge, and then there was a moment when non-scripted was in charge, which seems the balance has swung back to scripted. Where is that opportunity for non-scripted going to come from? Is it in the reinvention of an old format? Is it in the application of digital media? Where do you look for your hits? And have you got an inkling as to what would characterize that next big thing? Is there something in your line of vision that you think is the next big thing right now?
Well, it can come from anywhere, and it can come from any country. The beautiful thing about our business is there have been great formats, obviously from Great Britain, from Europe, from Japan, from Middle East, Latin America, Israel. I mean, today it could come from anywhere. I think that it's got to feel like an event today to be really successful, at least on American television, and probably the same way in most of the other major territories around the world. I think it's time for a big event game show. There hasn't really been one that's worked since Deal or No Deal. And I think something maybe in the docu-soap space, but on a bigger level than what you see on most of the cable networks. And there's such a blurring today. I mean, you look at a Duck Dynasty, which is really basically a sitcom, I wouldn't even put it in the non-scripted world anymore. So it might be something that's a hybrid like that too.
Is there still an appetite for what we know as traditional formats in the US market from the big networks? Have they still got room in their schedules for that programming?
They all do, but as it's always been the case where, the networks are much more, they embrace scripted more than non-scripted. But yes, they all need it. A lot of the really successful formats are not as hot as they were, so there's obviously room to replace those. I think if you're going to sell something to an American broadcast network, it's got to feel like a big event today to be able to get the eyeballs to come to it. People can talk about it the next day. Maybe it doesn't have to be live, but it's got to have something that people can really talk about the next day.
Looking around the world at the moment, there's been a lot of talk about those great franchises. We all refer back to Big Brother and Deal or No Deal. There's some really big players in the room there. What's impressed you over the last year or two? Not necessarily stuff you've packaged yourself, but are there brands and shows out there that you think are actually genuinely moving things forward? And if so, what are they?
Well, I'm very excited about a particular format that my client Zodiac has. They've had a great success in Germany with a show called Nation's Brightest. And one of my clients, a guy named Jeff Aploff, who created Don't Forget the Lyrics, has regenerated, jiggered it a bit for the American market. We haven't taken it out yet, but I think it's, to me, the freshest and most innovative game competition show I've seen in a long time. I mean, the German version is fantastic, but I think that the American version will be equally, maybe even better.
So what haven't you done yet that you'd like to do? What's on your development horizon, and what can we expect to see in future from Brand Itkin?
Well, I'm working on a Broadway musical with Tyler Perry, which is definitely out of my comfort zone, but I'm learning a lot. But it's something that I think is very marketable. And I'm working also on something with Zodiac. Again, they have a format called How the Other Half Lives. And it's about the 1% giving back to the 99%. And we've put in a very important talent. We've sold a pilot to a broadcast network. I'm excited about that because people have tried to do do-gooder shows. Like we know I packaged Extreme Makeover Home Edition, and there have been a lot of shows kind of like that, but none of them have ever kind of hit it on the nose like Extreme Makeover Home Edition did. And I think this one, How the Other Half Lives, can achieve that.
Cool. Well, look, we could talk for so long, and I'm sorry we've got such short time here. Mark and I did sit down today and have a long conversation in front of the cameras, which will be on C21 in the next week or two. So we talked in much more detail about his career and the shows he's packaged on. I hope that you'll come down the Martinez and have some cocktails with the group as well. But before we present Mark with his, to present Mark with his Gold Award, I'd like to welcome onto the stage Laureen Gorot from Reed Meadem and Patty Jeunesse. Are you still absolutely, or are you something else now, Pat?
Almost not absolutely independent anymore. Thank you, David. Well, the big Mark Itkin. Imagine that. Standing here for me, personally, is something very special. Because I was still a junior in the business, and I'm talking more than 23 years ago, when I worked for a company which name was not to be pronounced, or nobody could pronounce it, Joop van den Ende Productions. It was Joop van den Ende Productions, yep. JE Entertainment, now Endemol, where we had these beautiful formats, and we truly believed in those formats, and European countries did too. But when we went to the United States with my superior, who's still a good friend of you, Heidi van Botchhoff, we went to the United States, and everybody said, "What are you guys doing here? We don't need you. We create our own formats." But there was one guy that I remember, one guy who didn't say that, who said, this is great. What you guys are doing is great. I'll support you. And it may not have been the Sound Mix show and the Honeymoon Quiz, which traveled in Europe, but it turned out to become Big Brother as the big breakthrough, and not only for Endemol, but also for many other companies in the format industry after that. So, when C21, Reed Meadem, and FRAPA sat together, in our brainstorm about who deserves this gold award, a lifetime achievement award, you were on the top of our list.
That's very nice, thank you.
And you really, really deserve it. And you can imagine, 23 years later, for me personally, it is a great honor to stand here and give you this speech on behalf of all of us.
Thank you.
So I'll leave it up to Laureen here.
I can't top that. But I just want to say on behalf of ReMedia and MIPFormats, we're so proud to be part of this, associated to this award, and very, very honored to be presenting it to Mark Itkin today. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you. Very nice. Thank you.